The dust-laden wind whipped across the barren plains as Hannah Campbell clutched her battered valise, squinting at the dilapidated train station sign that read Silveridge, Colorado EST, 1868. Her heart sank as she realized the terrible truth. She was exactly 1 day late to meet the man who had paid for her journey west, a stranger she had agreed to marry sight unseen. The year was 1875, and at 22 years of age, Hannah had left behind everything familiar in Boston following the death of her parents. The advertisement in the matrimonial news had seemed like divine providence, a cattle rancher in Colorado territory seeking a bride of good moral character and sturdy constitution. With no other prospects and facing destitution, she had corresponded with one James Blackwell for 3 months before accepting his proposal and the train ticket he had sent. "Excuse me," Hannah approached the station master, a wizened man with a gray mustache that drooped at the corners. "I'm looking for Mr. James Blackwell. I was meant to arrive yesterday." The station master's eyes widened and he removed his spectacles slowly. "Miss, I'm afraid I have some unfortunate news. Mr. Blackwell was killed 2 days ago in a dispute over water rights." Shot dead at the Golden Spur Saloon. Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. "But I'm to be his wife." "I'm mighty sorry, miss. Terrible business. Town's still talking about it." The station master shifted uncomfortably. "If you need passage back east, there's a train tomorrow morning." Hannah sank onto a bench, her mind reeling. 3,000 miles from home, no family to return to, and now no future husband. The last of her savings had been spent on necessities for the journey. "You all right there, miss?" She looked up to see a tall man with broad shoulders and a kind face, dusty from the trail. His blue eyes showed concern beneath the brim of a well-worn hat. Unlike many of the rough-looking men she had seen since crossing into the territories, his face was cleanly shaved, though there was a hardness to his jaw that spoke of someone who had known struggle. I don't know what I am," Hannah admitted. "Name's Colton Sullivan," he offered, keeping a respectful distance. "Just brought in some cattle to sell. Couldn't help but overhear. You're James Blackwell's mail-order bride," Hannah nodded, fighting back tears. "A day late, it seems, and now." Colton removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair. "James was a friend of mine, not a close one, mind you, but we did business. What happened to him wasn't right." A sob escaped Hannah's throat, not for the loss of a man she had never met, but for the security that had vanished with him. "Miss Campbell, Hannah Campbell. Miss Campbell, I don't mean to impose, but you look like you could use a hot meal and some time to think. My sister runs the boarding house just down the street. Would be a safer place for you than sitting here alone with night coming on." Hannah studied his face for any sign of deception, but found only genuine concern. With no other options, she stood and gathered her belongings. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. That's very kind." The walk to the boarding house was short but revealing. Silveridge was a town of contrasts, newly built storefronts alongside rough wooden structures. Ladies in proper dresses passing women in gaudy attire, clearly employed at the saloon. Everything was coated in a fine layer of dust, as if the town itself was still raw and unfinished. "My sister Sarah took over the boarding house when her husband died of consumption 3 years ago," Colton explained as they approached a 2-story white clapboard building. "She's got a good heart and fair prices." Sarah Sullivan Miller turned out to be a no-nonsense woman in her 30s with the same blue eyes as her brother. Upon hearing Hannah's situation, she immediately offered a reduced rate for the room. "You can stay as long as you need to figure things out," she said, showing Hannah to a small but clean bedroom. "And don't you worry about those vultures in town trying to take advantage. Any friend of Colt's is under my protection." That evening, Hannah sat at the communal dining table alongside several other boarders, a schoolteacher, a clerk from the mercantile, and an elderly woman who knitted continuously as she ate. The food was simple but hearty, and for the first time since learning of Blackwell's death, Hannah felt her panic subside enough to think clearly. Colton joined them for dinner, having cleaned up from his journey. In the lamplight, Hannah noticed the small scars on his hands, the marks of a man who worked hard for his living. "Mr. Sullivan," she said quietly as the other boarders dispersed after the meal, "may I ask you something about Mr. Blackwell?" "Of course." "What kind of man was he, truly?" "Our letters were formal, and I realize I knew very little about the man I agreed to marry." Colton considered her question, turning his coffee cup slowly between his palms. "He was determined, built his ranch from nothing in 5 years. Not always the easiest man to deal with, but fair in business." He paused. "Miss Campbell, I hope you don't mind my asking, but what were your plans with James?" "To be a good wife," she answered simply. "To keep his home, bear his children, build a life together. I have some education. I taught at a small school before my parents died, but mostly, I wanted security and perhaps, in time, affection. And now," Hannah looked down at her hands, "now I have until tomorrow morning to decide whether to spend my last dollars on a ticket back east where I have nothing, or—" She trailed off, the alternative too uncertain to voice. "There are options here," Colton said carefully. "Silverage is growing. They need a schoolteacher for the children, or there's work at the general store." "For a woman alone," Hannah shook her head. "Mr. Sullivan, I may be new to the West, but I understand the realities. A woman without protection is vulnerable, and respectable employment won't change that." Colton nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. After a moment he spoke again, his voice lower. "Miss Campbell, I have a proposition for you, not the kind you're thinking," he added quickly when her eyes widened. "I own a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town. It's nothing grand like Blackwell's place, but it's mine, free and clear. I've been looking for help, and with the money from my cattle sale, I can afford to pay wages." "What kind of help?" "My mother passed last winter. She kept the house and the books. I can manage the cattle and the land, but I'm no good with figures and the place." He looked almost embarrassed. "Well, it needs a woman's touch if I'm being honest. You're offering me employment as a housekeeper and bookkeeper, with room and board included." He met her gaze directly. "It would be completely proper. You'd have your own room, of course, and if it doesn't suit you after a month, I'll pay your way back east myself." Hannah studied him, trying to discern his true intentions. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because James was expecting you and now he can't follow through. Because my sister would never forgive me if I didn't offer help to a woman in need." He hesitated. "And because I could use the help, truly." "I'll consider it," Hannah said finally. "Thank you." That night, Hannah lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, weighing her options. Returning east meant likely ending up in a factory or, worse, on the streets. Staying meant placing her trust in a man she had just met, in a land she didn't understand. Yet something about Colton Sullivan's straightforward manner gave her comfort. When dawn broke, her decision was made. 3 days later, Hannah found herself riding beside Colton in a wagon loaded with supplies, heading toward his ranch. The landscape was unlike anything she had known, vast stretches of prairie grass bending in the wind, distant mountains rising blue and imposing on the horizon, and a sky so wide it made her feel insignificant beneath it. "There it is," Colton said, pointing to a cluster of buildings nestled against a small rise. Sullivan's Reach. As they drew closer, Hannah could make out a modest but sturdy-looking ranch house with a wide porch, a large barn, a bunkhouse, and several outbuildings. It wasn't grand, but it had a settled, permanent feel that appealed to her. "You have other workers?" she asked, noticing the bunkhouse. "2 hands year-round, Miguel and his son Diego. Good men, been with me 5 years. During roundup, I hire a few more temporarily." He glanced at her. "They live in the bunkhouse, take their meals there too. The main house is private." Hannah nodded, relieved. The arrangement seemed sensible and, importantly, respectable. The inside of the ranch house revealed both Colton's honesty about needing help and his mother's previous care. The bones of the place were good, solid furniture, well-made curtains now dusty with neglect, a kitchen with decent equipment now disorganized. It was clear a man had been living alone, focused on outside work rather than domestic matters. "It's not as bad as I feared," Hannah said diplomatically, running a finger through the dust on the mantel. Colton laughed, the sound warming the room. "You're being kind. It's a mess. Mother would be scandalized." He showed her to a bedroom at the back of the house, simply furnished but with a window that caught the afternoon light. "This was hers. I thought you'd be comfortable here." That first week tested Hannah's resolve and strength. She threw herself into cleaning the house from top to bottom, organizing the kitchen, and reviewing the account books Colton had kept haphazardly. The work was harder than anything she had done in Boston, but there was satisfaction in seeing immediate results. Colton kept to his word, treating her with respect and giving her space to settle in. He left early each morning to work with the cattle and often returned late, taking the meals she prepared with genuine gratitude but little conversation. Hannah found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the way the sun had burnished his skin to a deep tan, how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the gentle way he spoke to his horse. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Hannah was kneading bread dough when Colton came in earlier than usual. "Thought you might like to see more of the ranch," he said, almost shyly. "It's a fine evening for a ride." Hannah hesitated, her hands covered in flour. "I'm not much of a rider, I'm afraid. Old Belle is gentle as a lamb, and I thought—" He shifted his weight. "Well, you've been working hard in the house. Might be nice to get some air." The gesture touched her. Hannah quickly finished the dough and set it to rise, then changed into the practical split skirt Sarah had helped her purchase in town. Belle was indeed a gentle mare, and with Colton leading the way on his gelding, they rode across the property as the afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light. He showed her the creek that provided water for the cattle, the south pasture where the Nukev stayed with their mothers, and finally, a rise that overlooked the entire ranch. "It's beautiful," Hannah said, truly meaning it. The land had a wild, untamed beauty that stirred something in her soul. "How did you come to own it?" Colton dismounted, helping her down from Belle before answering. "Started as a cowhand when I was 17, saved every penny, bought this place when I was 25, just 100 acres then, added more over the years." Pride resonated in his voice. "It's not the biggest spread, but the water rights are solid and the grazing is good." "You've built something remarkable," Hannah said, watching the cattle grazing peacefully below. "It's a good life, but a lonely one sometimes." The admission seemed to surprise even Colton himself. "I mean, before Mother passed." Hannah felt a connection forming between them, delicate as a spider's web. "I understand loneliness. After my parents died, even in a city full of people, I felt completely alone." Colton nodded, their shared understanding needing no further words. They stood in companionable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. As the weeks passed, a rhythm developed between them. Hannah managed the house and books, started a small vegetable garden, and even began teaching Diego's 2 young children their letters in the evenings. Colton worked from dawn until dusk with his cattle, but increasingly found reasons to return to the house during the day: a forgotten tool, a question about dinner, a book he suddenly needed. Each interaction was brief but meaningful, building a foundation of trust and growing attraction that neither acknowledged openly. Hannah found herself looking forward to the sound of his boots on the porch, and Colton discovered new pleasure in returning home to a well-kept house and the sight of Hannah working in the kitchen. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of canning vegetables from her garden, Hannah sat on the porch, watching as a thunderstorm built on the horizon. The air was heavy with electricity, matching the tension that had been building between her and Colton. "Magnificent, isn't it?" Colton said, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. "The storms out here can be fearsome, but there's something cleansing about them. In Boston, storms just meant wet feet and ruined hats." Hannah smiled, accepting the cup. "Here they feel almost alive." "Everything feels more alive out here," Colton agreed, his eyes meeting hers briefly before looking away. A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched lightning flash in the distance. Hannah gathered her courage. "Mr. Sullivan, Colton, please. After 2 months of sharing a home, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Colton," she repeated, the name feeling right on her tongue. "I've been meaning to thank you properly. What you did for me, offering me this position when I had nowhere to go, it was truly the act of a good man." His expression softened. "You've more than earned your keep, Hannah. The house hasn't been this well managed since Mother was in her prime, and the books are finally making sense." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "Truth is, I should be thanking you." The first heavy raindrops began to fall, but neither moved to go inside. The storm seemed to provide a curtain of privacy, encouraging honesty. "I've been thinking," Colton said finally, his voice almost drowned by a rumble of thunder. "Winter's coming in a few months. The passes get difficult and town is hard to reach. I usually hire a cook for the bunkhouse, but this year—" He took a breath. "What I mean to say is, would you consider staying on permanently?" Hannah's heart quickened. "As your housekeeper?" "No." Colton set his coffee down and turned to face her fully. "Hannah, I know this isn't what you came west for. You expected to be a wife, not an employee, but these past months, getting to know you, seeing your strength and kindness." He reached for her hand tentatively, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. "I find myself hoping for more than an employer-employee relationship." Hannah's breath caught. "What exactly are you proposing, Colton?" "Courtship to start." His smile was warm despite the raindrops now falling steadily around them. "I'm not asking you to marry me today. We should take time to be sure, but I want you to know my intentions are honorable and my feelings genuine." Hannah felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the uncertainty of her future that had haunted her since arriving in Colorado. "I would like that very much." As if in response, the sky opened up completely, rain pouring down in sheets. They ran inside laughing, soaked to the skin but light of heart. The autumn that followed was the happiest time of Hannah's life. Colton courted her properly, bringing wildflowers from the range, taking her on picnics by the creek, and even arranging trips into town for church and social gatherings. Sarah, upon learning of their courtship, was delighted, informing Hannah that she'd known Colt needed a good woman from the moment he reached adulthood. Their evenings were spent by the fire, Colton reading aloud from one of his precious books while Hannah mended or knitted. Sometimes they simply talked, sharing stories of their childhoods and dreams for the future. Hannah spoke of her love of teaching and her hope to someday start a proper school for the ranch children and those from neighboring properties. Colton confessed his ambition to breed a hardier strain of cattle that could better withstand the harsh Colorado winters. As the aspen trees turned golden and the nights grew cooler, their affection deepened into love expressed first in glances and brief touches, then in longer embraces, and finally, one crisp October evening, in a kiss that left them both breathless. "I love you, Hannah Campbell," Colton whispered against her lips. "I think I've loved you since that first day at the train station, and I love you," Hannah replied, marveling at how naturally the words came. "Though I believe it took me at least a week to fall completely." He laughed, pulling her closer. "I've been thinking about what you said when we first met about wanting security and, in time, affection. I can offer both now without hesitation." The first snow fell in early November, dusting the ranch in pristine white. That morning, Colton took Hannah to the rise where they had first ridden months before. The landscape spread before them like a painting, the ranch buildings nestled against the hillside, smoke curling from the chimney, cattle dotting the white-covered pastures. "I want to build something here," Colton said, his breath visible in the cold air. "Not just a cattle ranch, but a home, a family." He turned to her, taking her gloved hands in his. "Hannah Campbell, will you marry me, be my partner in everything, this land, this life, whatever comes?" Tears of joy froze on Hannah's cheeks as she nodded. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Silveridge, with Sarah standing as Hannah's witness and Miguel for Colton. The town turned out in force, curious to see the mail-order bride who had arrived for one man, but found her destiny with another. The minister, a kind older man who had ridden circuit in Colorado territory for 30 years, smiled as he pronounced them husband and wife. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said. "Sometimes the delay of a train can be the greatest blessing." As they drove back to the ranch through the snow, now husband and wife, Hannah rested her head on Colton's shoulder. "I was so frightened when I arrived that day, learning James was dead. I thought I'd made a terrible mistake coming west." Colton squeezed her hand. "You arrived a day too late for him, but you were right on time for me." The winter passed in newlywed bliss, the isolation of the snow-bound ranch creating an intimate cocoon for Hannah and Colton to build the foundation of their marriage. They shared not just their bodies, but their hopes and fears, their strengths and weaknesses. Hannah discovered Colton's nightmares about the drought years when he'd nearly lost everything. Colton learned of Hannah's deep-seated fear of ending up destitute like the women she'd seen begging on Boston's streets. By spring, Hannah's small teaching sessions for Diego's children had expanded to include 3 more from a neighboring ranch. Colton built simple desks and benches in what had been a storage room, creating a makeshift schoolhouse that brought Hannah immense satisfaction. "Next year we'll need a proper school building," Colton said one evening, watching Hannah prepare lessons. "If you're teaching, you should have the right equipment." Hannah looked up, surprised. "You'd build a schoolhouse? For you, I'd build anything." His smile was tender. "Besides, education is important. These ranch children deserve the same opportunities as city folk." As summer approached, bringing with it the intense activity of calving season, Hannah discovered she was expecting their first child. The news transformed Colton. He became somehow both more protective and more vulnerable, checking on her constantly while revealing his fears about fatherhood. "What do I know about raising a child?" he confessed one night, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. My own father was harsh at best, cruel at worst. What if I become like him? Hannah stroked his cheek. You won't. You know what not to do, and your heart is good, Colton Sullivan. Our child will be loved and guided, not dominated. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. Hannah continued teaching until her condition made it impractical, then focused on preparing for the baby. Sarah visited regularly, bringing hand-sewn clothes and practical advice. Even Miguel's wife Maria became a frequent visitor, sharing traditional remedies for morning sickness and swollen ankles. Winter settled over the ranch once more, and as the first anniversary of their meeting approached, Hannah felt the baby drop lower, signaling the birth was near. The midwife from town moved into the guest room, ready to assist when the time came. 3 days later, after 14 hours of labor that tested Hannah's endurance to its limits, their daughter was born as dawn broke over the snow-covered ranch. They named her Clara Sarah Sullivan, honoring both Colton's mother and his sister. She's perfect, Colton whispered, cradling his daughter with hands that seemed suddenly too large and rough for such a delicate being. Tears tracked unashamedly down his face. Look what we made, Hannah. Hannah, exhausted but radiant, watched the man she loved fall completely under the spell of their tiny daughter. In that moment, the journey that had brought her west, the grief, the uncertainty, the fear crystallized into perfect clarity. Every step had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Spring came again, bringing with it Clara's first smile, the new calves, and unexpected news. The banker from Silveridge rode out personally to inform them that James Blackwell's property was being sold to settle his debts. Given Colton's adjacent land and good standing with the bank, he was being offered first opportunity to purchase. It would mean more debt than I've ever carried, Colton told Hannah that night after the banker had left. But the combined properties would secure our future, Clara's future, beyond anything I imagined. Hannah bounced their daughter gently, considering, what does your heart tell you? That I want to build something that lasts generations. That I want our children and grandchildren to have roots deep in this land. He looked out the window at the ranch that had been his dream for so long. But I won't risk what we have. This decision is ours, not just mine. Hannah joined him at the window, Clara sleeping against her shoulder. Then let's build that legacy together. I believe in you, in us. 3 years later, the expanded Sullivan Ranch was thriving. The proper schoolhouse Colton had promised stood near the main house, with 12 students now attending Hannah's classes. Clara, a spirited toddler with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination, spent her days either helping her mother teach or following her father around the ranch, collecting treasures of rocks and feathers. Hannah's belly was round with their second child, due before harvest. The doctor in town suspected twins, given her size, a prospect that both terrified and delighted Colton. On the anniversary of their wedding, Colton took Hannah back to the rise that had become their special place. Though her pregnancy made the ride challenging, Hannah insisted on the tradition they had established. From their vantage point, they could see the changes 5 years had brought: the expanded herd, the new barn, the schoolhouse with its bright red door, and the bunkhouse now expanded to house the additional hands needed for the larger operation. Did you ever imagine this? Hannah asked, leaning back against Colton's chest as they sat on a blanket spread over the grass. When you offered employment to a stranded mail-order bride, Colton's arms tightened around her. No, but I hoped. Even then, something told me you were special. Hannah smiled, placing his hand on her belly where one of the babies was kicking vigorously. Some might call it providence that my train was delayed. I call it the luckiest day of my life, Colton replied, kissing the top of her head. You may have been a day late for James Blackwell, Hannah Campbell Sullivan, but you were exactly on time for me. As the sun set over Sullivan's Reach, casting long shadows across the land they both loved, Hannah felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey west had not led where she expected, but it had brought her home.